I don't know if any reason to go back on last week's game. We can go move ahead and expedite this as much as possible. But obviously, we're playing a really good football team, and looking forward to this week's practice. I mean, it really hasn't changed for us. We can't miss a day, can't miss a meeting, can't miss a practice. We got a long ways to go. We've ran the ball a little better last week. We're still a very average to below average rushing football team. Made some plays throwing the ball. Quarterbacks have played well. Defense didn't play very good in the first half and made a few adjustments, played better. So I don't know that we can take a half off this week and be in a fog and still play well enough to be happy at the end of the game.
How do you approach now? The number of undefeated teams nationwide has dwindled each week. Now it's down to 5. How do you approach the psychology of that with your players, that they're one of those 5?
You know, it's not been mentioned. They don't say much about that.
They talk about it, though, don't they? I mean, they know it.
I don't know if they do. I don't know what they talk about anymore. When they're around us and in meetings and practice, they have matured and stayed fairly focused on what we're doing. I don't really hear them saying much. Do they mention that when they're over there at where they live and when they're hanging out with their buddies? Probably very true, but I don't hear anything about being undefeated and hadn't really heard much about the rankings.
Do you feel like that live for today mentality you've tried to stress with your players kind of helps them from maybe getting too high, too low, especially when you talk about what's left for you guys on the schedule?
It's helped me. It's helped our staff, and I would like to think that it's helped our players. And they listen, and we give them information every day. And then usually the truth is the best, and that they just can't bypass a day, and that's really the way it is. That wasn't the same message years ago. The other years we won 11 and 12 games, whatever it may be. There were different type of athletes and players on the team, so the message wasn't like it is this year.
They obviously know what's at stake with these last 2 games, but how important is it, too, that you tell these guys, like, this is fun? They're out there playing at such a high level. I mean, they got to have fun with this, too, right?
They need to embrace the moment. All of us do. That's one thing that I've been able to do this year is I really enjoy the team. I think they're maximizing who they are as an individual, which as a team concept, we're getting what we can get out of our football team. And so we put our work in and we buy into the system, and then at night you go home and go to sleep. And it's been really fun for me. And I hope that our coaches, and I have said this to them multiple times over the last 4, 5, 6 weeks, is that enjoy the time that we're having and embrace being with these guys and the effort they're giving us. And I've said the same thing to them, because sometimes in life, well, in today's society, it moves too fast. And you look back and you think, I don't even know if I enjoyed that ride. So we have stressed that to them, and then the importance of preparation for the next game.
Mason Rudolph's really cut his interceptions. He's only had one the last 4 weeks. What's changed for him in that regard?
I think he's maturing and growing up. I think Mike is doing a great job with him. I think he's, like most of us, the more that you get an opportunity to, or I should say get more reps at whatever we do, you're going to get better at. And he's improved in those areas. I think he understands. I thought last week was his best game of understanding coverage and dumping the ball down and getting it in the hands of players that could make positive yardage for our team.
He became your starting quarterback a year ago. But that, obviously, a move like that's a head coaching decision. Did you make it on that Sunday, that Monday, Tuesday? Do you remember that process? Did you make it driving to the stadium or at a meeting? How did that come about?
I'm guessing our quarterback got hurt on Saturday, right? So it's probably Sunday. Had to be made then, that afternoon.
Even though the results are undeniably good, do you still remember it as being a painful, excuse me, Mike, a painful decision to have to pull him out of the red shirt?
Not painful, just a decision that none of us like, because we would prefer for each one of the players to maximize their time in college. It doesn't always work out that way, but we want them to be able to develop their bodies to grow, to mature, to play the most games they can play, get the most plays, leave with an education, and have a great experience. And so it's hard to say, okay, we're this far into it, but we need you because we think it's what's best for the team, because we owe it to the seniors to give them the best chance to win. And so it wasn't painful, but it certainly wasn't easy.
Coach, you mentioned being an average run team. In spite of that, you've seemed to expand the offense. Talk about that process and kind of what meetings are like. You've got to be having fun with that.
They're long. There's a lot of a lot of video that goes in. I would say Coach Yursich and that staff have done a great job. And I don't know if smoke and mirrors is a good word, but they're doing a lot of different things to be able to accumulate yards in ways that are somewhat different than what we've had here in the past based on who we are as an offensive team right now, and incorporating JW into the mix and to allow him to rush the ball at times and gives us those rush yards that we need. We blocked better in this game in running plays than we have all year, but we still have a long ways to go, and we'll continue to work at it this week.
Does the fact that you are able to improve in that area you're talking about, where improvement has been slow to come, you're making those strides, pertaining to my 10-0 question and national championship playoff question and all that, does that little bit of progress give you something to point at with the players? Guys, you think you're 10-0, but look how much we improved this week, or something like that, where you can actually point to something and say, as an illustration?
Well, about 5 weeks ago we had this discussion, and I'd mentioned it won't be in a week. It won't be in 2 weeks, and it won't be in 3 weeks, because you only get 2 practices. You get a Tuesday practice and a Wednesday practice, and a Wednesday practice is only in shoulder pads. So you get 6 practices, 8 practices really is all we've had, and that's why it's a slow process. And I don't know any other way to make it happen faster, because if you try to, then you can beat your players up, and they're not going to be fresh, and in our opinion, won't play as well. So it does factor in, and it is a good example of it takes time, and we have to continue to improve in those areas. As I had mentioned a month ago, is to be able to rush the football better. We needed to improve in some coverage units in our kicking game, which I think we have. Our punter in target punting has been excellent. And then our downfield coverage has been better than it was in the first 5 games of the year.
As it relates to everybody's big prize, though, college football playoff, Big 12 championship, you can use that maybe as an illustration to guys to say, if you think you're this, you're not, because look how much work we've done to get to here.
I haven't had to, because we can show our players where the improvements have to be made just in the games we played. And certainly, we don't have a question of not wanting to or envisioning not preparing for this next game. It kind of takes care of itself, and so it's not been an issue with our team.
Records for third and longs this year. Are you surprised? I guess you've had 76 plays, Michael, third and long, which is, I guess, 3rd and 7 or longer. Are you surprised at the efficiency that you're so much better on third down this year?
Yeah, I've not been around a team that's been as successful on third and long. It's not good to be in that many third and longs. One of the factors that contributes to that is we're not a very good running football team, and so you get in situations that aren't as favorable. But I think the coaching staff, again, has done a nice job of preparation in that area, and I think Mike's done a nice job with Mason in understanding what's out there and where to go with the football, and it's worked for us up to this point. Would prefer to cut those numbers in half on average in the next game, see if we could make it a little easier for our team.
Your team reminds me of the Notre Dame team from 2012 that just kind of found a way every week, and every game was tough and didn't always look pretty. Can you recruit resilience and toughness? I mean, or is it something where you recruit guys and you just get lucky with it? You see what I'm saying?
I mean, we've had this discussion before. We call it in our organization the football IQ. There's certain criteria that falls into a football IQ: toughness, willingness to do whatever it takes for a team, be unselfish, play with pain, football savvy, intelligence, and it's so hard to identify. The stars that people put on them very seldom tell the true story of what their football IQ will be. I'll give you a quick example. Chad Whitener's from right down here in Dallas, and he had to go all the way across the country for somebody to give him a scholarship. And I'm not saying he's Dick Butkus. All I'm saying is that he's a pretty good football player, and how in the world he got from Dallas all the way to the West Coast. I know he's a good student, and Cal's a good school, and so on and so forth, but you would think there would be a few schools around here that would really pursue him. How do you know? Jalen McCleskey was kind of the guy that we took at the end, and he was with us all along, but we never really knew, and he comes in and has a very high football IQ. So I'd like to say that it's not, but there's some luck involved.
You watch OU Baylor video. Are your eyes so conditioned that you're watching Baylor almost exclusively, or are you, because they're both upcoming opponents, are you kind of watching them both?
It's funny. I have not watched OU yet. I've watched all of Baylor's tape, and I have not watched the game on either side of the ball yet. I hadn't got that far. So that'll be my next goal after, this afternoon. Had not got that far.
You mentioned, or Bill asked about 3rd and long. And I was going to ask how much more trusting the run game, how much trust the run game earned this weekend. The answer may have come in a combination of that. You ran the ball with Chris Carson on a 3rd and 7 and converted. Can you take me through? Was that a check or was that a call out to the field from Mike? And were you going, what are we doing here? And take me through that scenario, because that's pretty trusting on a 3rd and 7.
It was a call, and I couldn't get to my button to ask them if they'd completely lost their mind fast enough. It's back on your hip, and I couldn't find my talk button because I usually keep it off. And by the time I had gotten to my talk button, it was too late. But Mike felt like that was a spot we needed to run the ball.
Carson ran more decisively the other day. You know what I mean?
Thought he was better.
Just go in a straight line and get what you can get.
Thought he was better. Mentioned it to the team afterwards. There were a lot of things that happened in the game that were good. There were certain plays that changed the momentum and allowed us to stay in the game and push through it in the end. But one area that was different in this game than had been over the last 6 weeks is 32's ability to run hard. And I don't have an answer for you. It's the same thing we talked about. He just played better in that game than he had in the last month.
That group's been really good as receivers too. Carr with the short stuff there in the goal line, and then Chris Carson hadn't caught a lot of passes, but when he does, they're real productive.
Both of those guys are good receivers and understand, and Mike or Marcus does a good job of coaching them. And Carr is a decent weapon for us, and when he gets the ball in space, and we need to find ways to make that happen more than we have up to this point. Not always easy, but when he gets the ball out there, he's been pretty good.
Coach, how big was Marcel Aitman for you guys over the weekend? Did you expect that kind of game from him, and just what have you seen in his development?
We liked our height matchup in this game, the last game, and we knew we needed to take advantage of it, but that's not always a given based on the coverages or what they can give us. They can play their corners flat and play their safeties over the top if they want. So there's certain areas of the game that we feel like that we need to take advantage of, and that was one of them. Was we felt like that he had a height and a jumping ability that could make plays for us with their corners.
Coach, looking at this weekend's game, obviously you know what Baylor does offensively. Is your team good enough offensively to maybe play with some tempo to maybe help your defense out a little bit?
We can play with tempo. There's times that we choose not to, and then there's other times, if you've seen us in games, that we fire away for an extended period of time, and a lot of that's based on how the defense is playing. If the tempo plays that we have built in for this game or the game that we were in is working, the scheme was good. Sometimes you miss as a coach. You put a lot of time and effort into a scheme and then it doesn't work, or the other team had you scheme better. So you just got to get rid of it and go to something else. So a lot of things factor in, but one thing from an outsider looking in with Coach Briles is they're going to run their plays. And they have schemes on defense they believe in. Coach Bennett's been doing it for he's a coach a long time, but I've been around him for 20 years or so, and his system is not going to change a whole lot. And Coach Briles has what he believes in, that he was doing at Houston. And then at Baylor for all those years, nobody knew it because the players they had just weren't as good as the ones now. And so that tempo could factor in, but we also have to be able to have tempo in our offense in case we need to use it at any point during the game.
You faced Kansas State teams that were pretty brutal, so you can appreciate what Snyder has done there. And then you coached against Baylor teams that were pretty lacking. So would you put what Briles has done at Baylor in the same class as what Snyder has pulled off at Kansas State?
I think he's on track to get to a position like what he's been able to do just because of the long term. The only difference is that there was a time there in the early '90s when Baylor was pretty good. You know, they were in the Alamo Bowl and so on and so forth. I don't know. I'm not trying to make comparisons to. Coach Briles has done a terrific job and have a lot of respect for the way he worked his way up in this profession and to where he's gotten. And I hate to quote Coach Switzer, but what Coach Switzer said was exactly right. When Coach Snyder went into that place, that it was over. And what he has done there is a little different just because I'm not old enough to know if Kansas State ever won any games in football before he got there. So it's hard for me to say. I can only go back to the 70s where I started watching football. And Baylor with Coach Taft had made some strides, and they were pretty good and competitive in that league, and then so on and so forth. Don't get me wrong, he's done a great job, but the only difference is Kansas State had a pretty long run there where they didn't have a lot of success.
At one point, Baylor was like 3-9 in the Big 12, before they climbed out of that.
Sure. So, I agree with what you're saying. There's no question that that's made a huge impact on that university. I don't know what he's worth to that school. I can't even put a dollar figure on the marketing and what he's brought to that school. I mean,
easier to also recruit in Central Texas than it is to recruit in Manhattan, Kansas. Is that?
There's an advantage in being in the Texas area. Sure, there's I don't know 3 or 4 players a year that we offer in the state of Kansas, and there's 200 we offer in the state of Texas.
Mike, there's an awful lot of talking going on that we could see from TV between OU and Baylor. Your guys, you talk a lot about seeing the right body language and that sort of thing. You ask some of the guys about how would you describe the overall approach of this team, and quiet confidence seems to come up. Is that something that you specifically say, hey, don't bother with trash talking a lot because it doesn't help you, or do you address that at all?
We address it all the time. Everybody has their own way. It doesn't make anybody's way right or wrong. But, I'll be honest with you. I tell my guys it's just a waste of time. You're just wasting your own oxygen because you're going to get to play the next play. If you have an issue with a guy, you need to wait till the ball's snapped and then do something till the whistle blows or while it's inside the white lines. All the other stuff to me is just a waste of time. Now, that doesn't mean that some people aren't different and that hypes them up and it makes them play better. It could be true. But I see it for our team as a distraction, and it's a loss of focus and pretty much just a waste of energy for our team, if that answers your question.
How do you, of all the guys you played for, worked alongside, or had on your staff, offensive guys, how does yours rate or compare with creativity to other guys you work with?
Well, I think he's up there. I've been very fortunate to be around some good football coaches on that side of the ball and different styles. And he's certainly very intelligent and very creative, and is developed into what I would describe as a good teacher. And he's kind of a young and rising star in this profession. Fortunately, I've had him, 3 years now. Hopefully we can keep him here for a while and let him develop, but he's done really well.
He was kind of a punching bag on social media during your losing streak last year. It would just seem that at certain points last year with the issues you had, you could bring Bill Walsh back from the dead and he couldn't play call. stuff that would work. If you don't have weapons, how do you get first downs and touchdowns? Did you ever talk with him about that stuff, and did you feel it was unfair?
Well, I felt it was unfair, but that doesn't make a difference in the world we live in today. And so there's not really anything to discuss about it. I watched him, and I never felt like that he needed somebody to pat him on the back. He's been very strong, and that has crossed my mind because that's my job. But I watched him all along, and never did he flinch. He understood what was going on. He believed in himself. He calls his plays. He coaches. He works long hours. He has a plan. He studies. Saturday morning before we eat in our pregame, we all walked by. He's in there watching tape Saturday morning. And at that point, kind of it's over for guys. So I never needed to pat him on the back and say, hey, don't worry about it. He was fine all along.
Mike, now that we've been through 10 games, how do you assess the impact of your analysts, Bill Clay and Darrell Wyatt, and your ability to adapt week to week? Because it would seem like that advanced scouting would allow you to install some of these new sets and to kind of change more quickly. Is that how it's going?
We need two more on each side of the ball for what they brought to the table for us. And you take a guy like Bill Clay and Darrell. Bill Clay was calling plays for 30 years. I mean, he may have called for more than that. I'm just throwing a number out there. So he sees the game differently than everybody else. And he's there. He understands it. He sees it. He has a feel. And so it's like having cliff notes for a class in college. They give you your cliff notes on what the next opponent is. And so instead of taking a total of, like for us, like 6 hours of video on Sunday, and then today like 10, so 16 hours. You can take 16 hours and condense it down into about 2 to 3 hours if you have the Cliff Notes version and it's the right Cliff Notes. And that's what those guys bring to the table. If we want to look and confirm and do stuff ourselves, which we do, but still there's only so much my brain can handle or our brains can handle at one time until you're at a point where you're just tired and you're not any good at it. They give you a shortcut to preparation, and you can trust them because they've been there and done that. They're not just drawing up a bunch of plays and schemes and giving you advice. I feel very strongly about them, and they're very valuable to the success that we've had up to this point.
Being that this is their first year on staff, has it maybe take a few weeks to kind of for them to figure out what each assistant really needed and then the best way to present information, or has it really been clicking since day one?
You know, it's funny you ask that. Those two guys don't give a flip about the assistants, what they think. They're going to give you their opinion, and then, like Bill said, you can take this and you can throw it out the window or you can use it. I don't care. And he's been tremendous because they don't have egos. And in a position like this, I'm guessing if you had guys that had egos, it probably wouldn't be as successful because they would want to have more input. They would want to think that they played a role. They would want people to think that, hey, this is why this is happening. And we don't have that issue with them. And so that's why it's been good for our team.
You talk about the run game improving, offensive line play improving, and run blocking. It seems like your pass blocking has been real solid all year long. I mean, how do you make sense of an offensive line that's great at pass blocking but not so great at run blocking?
We've been good pass blockers. Not great, but good. And we've been below average run blockers, and we were average last week. And I don't have an answer for that. I wish I knew. I'd have solved that problem 10 weeks ago. But I will say this, that they, for the most part, they're still a fairly young group. And that is a position in my history that takes time and maturity and body strength, and you're working with me and I'm working with you, and if they twist and move and the backer moves, I know that you have him and I have him. And midway through the season, we didn't have all that cleaned up at that time. They're a little better at it now, and they're starting to learn to work together as a group. The guys that we had here in those years that we were winning double-digit wins, seasons, those guys aren't playing in the NFL except for Lane, who's playing with the Packers. All those other guys are out there in the real world and they have real jobs. But they knew each other. They had a feel for each other. They played hard and they were tough guys. And that's really where we should be at this time next year, is what my goal is.
Was last week then sign of progress, or is there still a fear that it could be an aberration, something that just stands out and you guys might revert this week?
I don't think we will, but there was progress, and they've improved. They've gotten a little bit better. There's times that they made progress and they had a couple ugly things happen, and they did a little better. So, I said this a while back. We were about a 3 on a 1 to 10, and we went to a 4, and we went back to a 3, and in that game we were probably a 5.5. It's probably the highest we've been all year.
Mike, a lot's been happening with your fellow head coaches around the country, and a lot of crazy, and changes. Jerry Kill was one you were familiar with from high school, but Gary Pinkel's definitely a contemporary. I know he's a guy that you have been a coach with in the same league. What were your thoughts when you heard his situation?
Well, both those guys, obviously with Coach Kill, I've known him for a long time, and I had mentioned this, that he worked his way up through the ranks and deserved to be where he's at. And he's one of those coaches that was at a program where he has to take the players he has, and he could win 8 games and maximize them and coach better than a team that may be winning 12 at some other school. And then you have Coach Pinkel that has won. I saw it the other day. He's been the head coach there, I think, is it 14 years? And he had 117 wins in 14 years at Missouri, and had some years where they were really good, and rode the wave. He went through times where Les was a head coach here, and they had a couple bad years, like won 4 games or something, and next year won 5, and people talked about getting rid of him, and he kind of rode the wave, and then he came back, and before you knew it, he was winning 9, and then I think he had a 7 or 8, and then he won 10 one year. And that's really kind of what you look for in a guy, and I hate that he's out of the game, because he's another coach. I think he came to Missouri from Toledo that has worked his way up and has been successful, and he believes in his system, and it was kind of what I think college coaches should stand for.
Everybody naturally goes to the skills positions on the Baylor offense, but their offensive line has given up the fewest sacks all season in the Big 12. How good is that front 5?
Well, they're massive, and they run, block, and throw passes, and there's not a lot of pass rush, and they've done that for a while. They're good at it. They've taken huge human beings and developed them and coached them into the scheme that they believe in, and they're really good at it. It's hard to get around them. You can't really get through them. Sometimes they're shoe-to-shoe splits next to each other, and it makes it difficult. They believe in their system, and they stick with it.
What's been the key to the diverse rush attack? You've had 6 different leading rushers this year. Is it just kind of feeling the hot hand? Or
Us?
Yeah, you guys.
We haven't been very good at it at all. Raymond got hot for a while, and Carson played well in the last game, and JW has given us some rush, but we've been pretty average at it. We really haven't had the choice of being selective. It's been more just kind of what's happened for us.
I know Todd Mace is a guy who battled some injuries early in camp and all that, but any chance we could see him enter that mix in the last few games?
Todd's in Mississippi. Unless he comes a long ways back, it'll be hard. He's decided to he didn't want to play anymore, and he went back home. So I didn't mean to be sarcastic, but I thought maybe you knew and you were just seeing if I was going to. Okay. No, he went back to Mississippi, and he's not with us anymore.
How big of a loss is that, based on what you knew of him in junior college?
Well, we were hoping he'd fit in. It just didn't work out for him, and never really got comfortable, and then he was injured, had a couple injuries, and decided that he just wanted to go home. Sometimes that happens. So, all right.